One of the things that I don't hear many people talking about, and I was watching a lot of match clips here on YouTube and stuff, and looking it up as well on Google and stuff, and it's hard to believe, because it's hard to believe that in about 2 months or less than 2 months, we're going to have. It's going to be 7 years, I should say. It's going to be 7 years since I don't even know where to put this faction in category wise, but it's going to be 7 years since we had TNA, GFW now, GFW Impact, TNA, Global Force Wrestling, whatever you want to call them. It's going to be 7 years since we had the debut of their answer to the NWO Immortal. Yeah, October of this year will mark 7 years since Immortal debuted in TNA, now GFW. And I said this, I posted this in one of my questions to Slag Daddy at OTR Central. I said, I think I posed it to him in a question. I asked basically what is TNA or GFW now's obsession with factions? What do they think it's going to do? What do they believe it's going to do? Is it going to get them over the hump and make them well renowned? Is it going to get them on the same level as WWE? I don't know. But I do know that Immortal lasted to about 2012. But when I look at how you built, when I look back 7 years ago, because it's been 7 years since Hulk Hogan. It was a little over 7 years, as I say. A little over 7 years ago, back in January of this year would have been 7 years. But a little over 7 years ago, a little over 7 years now, Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff debuted in TNA. Along with them, they brought a lot of the people that were part of the Hulkamania tour. They brought Mr. Anderson in. They brought RVD. They brought in Sean Morley, Val Venus, if you will. They brought in the Nasty Boys, other people. And one thing that AJ Styles said in an interview with Stone Cold on the Stone Cold podcast that you can see on the network was everybody was afraid that things were going to go back to the way they were in WCW. It was going to be the good old boys network. And the people associated with Hogan and Bischoff and all them were going to get pushed. Thankfully that didn't happen because somewhere in the contracts, from what I've heard, the network, Spike at the time, Spike Network, along with the people at Panda Energy, made sure that history wouldn't repeat itself. And that the TNA originals, from AJ to Rude to Daniels to Joe to Storm, Kazarian, they would all be focused on in the company. They'd all be focused on, they all be put on that same level, that elite level. And the way this company got to the whole Immortal thing, it's kind of screwy. I mean, I understand that they were trying to, I understand that throughout this journey they were trying to get things to right. They were trying to ride things as they were in WCW, like Flair and Hogan. They were trying to renew that rivalry, but instead of just Flair and Hogan meeting in a match, and they met in a match. They met in a tag team match on Impact, as far as I remember. And it was Flair and Styles against Hogan and Abyss. But the way they worked this out was, it all culminated in a Lethal Lockdown match with Team Hogan and Team Flair, and Hogan and Flair being represented by some of the TNA talent and some of the talent they had brought in. Hogan had Abyss, RVD, Jeff Jarrett, Um, who else did he have? He had Jeff Hardy. Um, Flair had, Bully Ray, AJ Styles. He had Desmond Wolfe. Actually, he didn't have Bully Ray. What am I talking about? No, he had Desmond Wolfe. He had Bully Ray. He had not Bully Ray. He had Desmond Wolfe, Bobby Roode, James Storm, and AJ. So, not AJ, but Sting. He had Sting on there. So you had a hybrid there. And still, you couldn't get through that match without Hogan and Flair getting involved and renewing the old rivalry from WCW. Yeah, you had a tax spot that Flair went and did and all that, but you wouldn't expect any of that. Heck, I'll give him props for having Hogan using, I think maybe once or twice, a barbed wire baseball bat, which you never thought you'd see. But here's what I think really, if you're a smart mark, this really tipped you off, was when they had Sting turn heel. So why would you take someone like Sting, who had turned heel briefly as part of the main event Mafia, then turned face, and then turn him heel again? What was the point? Why would you have Kevin Nash confronting Hogan? What was going on here? Again, it was kind of confusing, but the one thing I will give TNA, GFW now, as much credit for, as much as people like Jeff Siegel, the Shrek Daddy, may not like to hear this, one thing I will give them credit for is they kind of made us not. It was kind of a you don't see it coming kind of deal. It's like you never saw it coming kind of deal. That is, however, until Abyss turned heel. When Abyss turned heel and did what he did, and put the 10-10-10, and then said they were coming, that pretty much spoiled it. Because up until the Abyss heel turn, they coincided with the 10-10-10 vignettes, and the 10-10-10 and they are coming vignettes. TNA, as much as people may not like to admit it, did a decent job of trying to swerve us. They did a decent job in trying to make us believe that history wasn't going to repeat itself, that everything was going to be different. That wasn't the case, because TNA, they're at fault here. They're at fault because of the fact that they could have kept this going. They didn't have to turn Abyss heel. They could have kept him face. They could have put him out with an injury, and then you could have ran 10-10-10 they. But you didn't have to run it. You could have just put 10-10-10 and that's it. As a vignette, nobody would know what that is. 10-10-10, 10-10-10. You could have done that. You didn't have to have Abyss say they are coming, they are coming. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to do that. Because when you had someone like Abyss, and like I say, coinciding with those vignettes saying they were coming on 10-10-10, you pretty much gave away and spoiled the fact that the they were going to be a group, were going to be consisting of a group was going to be a group, NWO-like or whatever it was going to be, consisting of Hogan and Bischoff. You knew they were going to involve them, but you didn't know, as well as Abyss, but you didn't know who the rest of the they were until Bound for Glory. Again, the point I'm trying to make is, you could have kept Abyss out of the picture, you could have put 10-10-10, and that's it, and then maybe afterwards you could have put, and then later on, as close as you got to Bound for Glory, you could have said 10-10-10, they arrive, or 10-10-10, history will be made or whatever. And it could have spoiled it a little bit, but then again, it could have kept people still on their feet. It's like, what are they talking about? And now we're so close. What are they talking about? You didn't have to have someone like Abyss say that they were coming, because pretty much when you had someone like Abyss acknowledge, oh, they are coming, you pretty much give away the fact that you're getting some kind of faction involving Hogan, Bischoff, and Abyss. And that's what happened. And again, like I said, I will give credit where credit is due. Up until that Abyss heel turn, up until he started referencing 10, 10, 10, and they, pretty much the company swerved us and made us think things were not going to happen. Or things were not going to, be, go in that direction. But unfortunately, it did, and that's where Immortal came in. And to say that TNA was desperate for attention, as confusing and as confusing and as convoluted as what I just said was, because that's how I feel things were with this at this moment, because they could have easily not gone in this direction of having the reveal be so obvious from somebody, especially coming from someone like the Monster Abyss. But when they finally arrived at 10, 10, 10, and then you're thinking to yourself, and they're saying they, it's like, to me, it's like TNA just couldn't help themselves. Because here's what gave them away. Here's what really didn't help them at first. When you have someone turn heel, who was recently endorsed as a babyface by babyface Hulk Hogan, you have him turn heel, you have him reference 10, 10, 10, you have him say they, and then you look at 10, 10, 10 coinciding with your WrestleMania, which is Bound for Glory, and you see what it's going to emanate from. Basically, that gives it away to the fans, to the smart marks, because the smart marks would be like, oh great, they're going to do the NWO all over again, TNA style, but you just don't know how they were going to do it until that happened. And like I said, as convoluted and as confusing as what I just said was, Immortal was the same way. Because at first, Immortal looked like, well, basically Immortal, let's face it, when they officially began as a group, not just at Bound for Glory 2010, but on the Impact that followed, when they began as a group, and you added Fortune to the mix, basically TNA's answer to the Four Horsemen, you added them to the mix, you were basically looking at TNA's answer to the NWO. Big old faction, a majority of the roster on one side, right? And then what happened to coincide with it? You have Sting walk away, just like he did in 1996. You have Kevin Nash walk away, because he didn't want to deal with it anymore. When in actuality, Kevin Nash's contract was up and he wanted to go back to WWE. Anyway, point is, they didn't want to deal with it anymore. They didn't. And this is where the confusion comes in. This is where TNA kind of dropped the ball. Because they had potential with Immortal. It could have helped them. Even though it was an NWO ripoff. Sans the NWO t-shirts. It could have worked for them. Had it not been for the fact that two of the men they wanted, or two of the men they needed, were no longer with the company. That being Kevin Nash and Booker T. Why? Because both left and went back to WWE. The only people they had left over were Scott Steiner and Kurt Angle of the Main Event Mafia. You see, the original plan was for the Main Event Mafia to feud with Immortal. But when that fell through, what did they do? They went back to something that seems to work and people seem to like. And that's getting the TNA originals, in this case Fortune, to go against Immortal. And at the same time, align themselves with two halves, or 2/3 of the Main Event Mafia in Kurt Angle and Scott Steiner, along with Mr. Anderson and RVD. You pretty much to counter Immortal, you pretty much bring in, or you pretty much take 1/4 of your group, which is Fortune, which consists of Fortune, and turn them against Immortal, and go the old traditional TNA originals against outsiders storyline. And as ridiculous as that sounds, TNA is the one that put themselves in that predicament because they were planning ahead, because they were planning way too advanced, because TNA had pretty much planned too much of an advancedly planned too. The word I'm trying to find is TNA basically planned way too much ahead at that time, thinking they were going to have the Mafia group, and they didn't. But you know what's funny about this? Oh, what's funny about this is the whole Immortal thing just was was just a joke in the end. It wasn't no NW. It went from being an NWO ripoff to basically being an abysmal joke. Here's what I mean. One of the people that was against them was Anderson. So what do? Well, you end up having Jeff Hardy drop the title to Sting at a pay-per-view. So Jeff Hardy drops the championship at a pay-per-view that year. I think it was one of your spring pay-per-views. I can't remember. I think it was one of the spring pay-per-views. You have Jeff Hardy basically be intoxicated in a rematch at Victory Road that same year and be deemed unsuitable to where the match between him and Sting goes 90 seconds. And he gets suspended and put into rehab, or has to go into rehab. So what do you do to answer that? What do you do to answer that? You have Mr. Anderson, Mr. Kennedy in WWE, win his second world title because he had won it previously. You have Mr. Anderson win the title from Sting and then side with Immortal. So basically you take a guy that was against Immortal and you have him side with Immortal. You have him become a member. And then if that's not all, you take another person that was against Immortal. Once he becomes champion, you have him defeat Sting for it, or defeat Sting to keep it, and thus you have him join Immortal as champion, and that person being Kurt Angle. The very guy that originally from a storyline perspective, along with Scott Steiner, was planning to bring the Mafia in to fight Immortal. And had aligned himself with Fortune along with Scott Steiner and Anderson. And speaking of Steiner, what do you do with him? You basically have him go against Kurt Angle and join Immortal, and then Kurt joins him as champion. And then if that's not enough, you go to Bound for Glory. Hogan loses the match to Sting. Hogan turns face, and now Hogan's against Immortal. And if that's not enough, if that's not enough, you have, because here's the thing, earlier in the year you had a Lethal Lockdown pay-per-view. I think that might have been where Jeff lost the title. But you have Fortune against Immortal. Okay? So later on,